This morning's scripture comes from the book of Psalms, the 23rd Psalm. I will be reading it from two different translations. The first will come from the Bible in basic English. The Lord takes care of me as his sheep. I will not be without any good thing. He makes a resting place for me in green fields. He is my guide by quiet waters. He gives new life to my soul. He is my guide in the ways of righteousness because of his name. Yes, though I go through the valley of deep shade, I will have no fear of evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your support are my comfort. You make ready a table for me in front of my haters. You put oil on my head. My cup is overflowing. Truly, blessings and mercies will be with me all of my days of my life, and I will have a place in the house of the Lord all of my days. The second translation is from Eugene Peterson's The Message. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I am not afraid when you walk by my side. Your trusty shepherd crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head. My cup brims with blessings. Your beauty and love chase after me every day of my life. I am back home in the house of God for the rest of my life. So ends the reading. May we be granted a greater understanding.
So powerful and so fitting for this day. Thank you for that. As many of our choir members go to sit with family or make their way home since they were here at first service, I am grateful for their witness this morning. If you were here last Sunday, you heard how translation can sometimes be theologically crucial. In Paul's words to the Ephesian church, it matters enormously whether we translate his words as give thanks for all things or give thanks over all things. The former seems to make God responsible for every evil that happens, and this is something we don't want to say. Translations are never easy. Even in English, John Kennedy's remark that the United States and England are two countries separated by a common language is true in many places as well. Bostonians and Southern Californians have many different terms for different things, and the same is true all across the country. And any translation of the Bible can become stale when words undergo a change of meaning. The 16th century's use of the word charity meant something entirely different than that word means today. Then, charity meant more or less what we now mean by the word love. You see, in any translation of the Bible, decisions must be made because not only are our culture and our situation so very different from that of ancient Palestine, but also because the Hebrew and Greek of the original biblical writings are simply so very different in their form, in their structure, in their grammar. One small example. In Hebrew, there are no vowels. Thus, translators sometimes have to make their best guess at a word's meaning, and different guesses can lead to very different translations. Imagine if that were true in English, and imagine that you are a translator faced with the following two letters, M and L. There are no vowels, though. Is it supposed to be translated as male or mule? Or are those the same? Or mile, or mole, or meal? The phrase going the second mile is rather different than going the second meal. The place, though, that I want to focus today's sermon is this. Translators are often faced with the choice of rendering verses in the first person, the Lord is my shepherd, or the third person, he makes me lie down, or in the second person, addressing God, your rod and your staff are a comfort to me. More succinctly, it's the difference between saying, I am, he is, you are. All three forms can be found in most any translation of the psalm. And all three forms are present in the two translations I've selected for today. The opening of this psalm in the Bible in Basic English's translation is in the third person. The Lord takes care of me as a sheep. It's a statement. It's a statement about someone else. It's a description. It's third person. But Eugene Peterson's translation is very personal, almost intimate, and rendered in the first person. God, my shepherd. All right. What do we do with all of this? And if you can be forgiven if you thought you were coming to church rather than English class, What might this have to teach us, though? And finally, what might it have to say to us on Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday? Well, let me suggest this. Third-person statements are statements of description. So-and-so is like such and such. This is the way things are. Kansas City has the best barbecue. Most theological statements are third person. God is love. God is just. Christ arose. Third person statements are the kind of statements that we can discuss together. They form that web of ideas, if you will, that make up our beliefs. They are, therefore, discussable. We can reason about them with each other. And we should. Oh my, we should. One of the best things about the church is that at its best, the church can be the place where our beliefs about God are both formed, but also sometimes challenged by other people. Because without the practice of other people taking your ideas about God seriously enough to discuss them with you, sometimes contend with you about them, it's possible for you to end up with some pretty bizarre and even hurtful beliefs about God. One example. If you believe that God is the sort of God from whom you must earn your salvation, earn your forgiveness, earn God's love, then you are holding on to an idea that will make your life far more anxious every single day than it ever needed to be. Having other people help you correct and sharpen your beliefs is one of the best things that church folks do for one another. It's why we have our regular Bible studies, Sunday school classes, other kinds of classes, the kind of class that Norman is restarting this week on Tuesday to help us firm up, but sometimes change our beliefs about God. For we always need to make sure that what we say in describing God makes moral sense. But as crucial as it is to have morally credible beliefs about God, that's not enough. One's faith, as Jesus reminds us, needs to include loving God not just with our mind, important as that is, but also our heart, our soul. Which means that faith is not simply about having good knowledge, good beliefs, but is also about having a life-giving relationship to God. In today's psalm, then, David, future king of Israel, acknowledges his own relationship with God, and not just those things that he knows, that he can describe about God, but the things that he feels deep down out of that relationship. It happens grammatically in the turn to the second person in this psalm. Did you hear it? At a crucial point, David addresses God using the second person. He says, you are my rod, my staff. You support me. You make a table ready for me. Do you hear the difference here between third person description of what God is like and second person ways of speaking to God? The first is like saying that so-and-so is your friend. The second is like you are speaking to so-and-so and thanking him for being such a good friend. The first is description. The second is testimony. The first is objective. The second is intimate and personal. But there's one more grammatical turn in the psalm. And the turn is again back to the first person. We hear it in the opening and closing verses. The psalm opens with, in the more traditional translation, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," and closes with, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." These are not just descriptions, and they're not speaking to God. On the face of it, it may look like David's just talking to himself, but it's more than that. For you see, this turn to the first person way of speaking represents not description, but decision. And thus it signals something very important for your life and my life, that no matter what we may believe, and no matter what our relationship with God might be, finally and ultimately and always, in the end, we must also decide how we will respond to that knowledge and that relationship. We must decide how we will react in recognition of that relationship. And David, here in the psalm, decides that he will trust God. David decides that in his actions, he will indeed seek to honor what he knows about God and his relationship with God. He decides to act as if life indeed is under the care of God and that he won't want in any ultimate way. Put another way, David commits himself in these opening and closing verses to act as if indeed God really is ultimately in charge, and that it is God and not the hurtful things of this world that are finally ultimate, and that God will indeed supply his deepest needs. That's decision, not just description. And it could have gone differently, you know. David could have said, after that description of God, after that acknowledgement of relationship, that nevertheless he was going to act as if the world was out to get him, as if God didn't really have the ultimate guarantee for his life. He could have decided to act as if it were his job to save himself, rather than trusting God's promise to give him an eternal dwelling place. But he didn't. He decided, he trusted, and he acted. So, my friends, did Martin Luther King. Tomorrow we celebrate the only federal holiday that is in honor of a Christian minister of the gospel. And what I will give thanks for is that indeed Dr. King also trusted God and decided to act. He too moved from description to decision and action. He could have just muttered to himself and made accommodations with the immoral practices around him, but he didn't. Like David, he decided to honor what he knew and honor his relationship with God by a courageous decision that eventually martyred him. His own words are far more eloquent than mine could ever be as he speaks about this move. Listen for it. As he speaks about this move from third person describing, believing, to first person action. It's in his eloquent letter from a Birmingham jail. Birmingham, you'll recall, is where arsonists firebombed a black church, injuring scores of people gathered to worship and killing 4 young girls as they sat dressed in their Sunday school classroom in their Sunday finery. Yet, in the face of that situation, some of Birmingham's citizens had pleaded with Dr. King, "No, you need to go slow." Here is part of the response that moves indeed from knowledge to calls to decision and action. Quote, "When you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the amusement park that she has just seen advertised on television, and you see her tears welling up in her eyes when she is told it is closed to colored people, and when your first name becomes nigger, then," Dr. King says, "then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. For there comes a time when injustice must be exposed to the light of conscience. Human progress," King says, "comes through the tireless efforts of men and women who are willing to be co-workers with God. Now is the time," he finishes, "to make real the promise of our democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood." Knowledge and relationship, third person, second person, each is important, but finally, in all of our lives, there are those moments that demand that we move to the first person, to decision and to action, to live out our beliefs, to show our trust in God, to follow our gentle Savior, our gentle shepherd, where he leads us. Is there something in your life that you are accommodating, but know that you shouldn't? Is there something that, as a Christian, that deeply troubles you, troubles your conscience about something in society? Then, friends, David and his lovely and his powerful psalm invite you to prayerfully move to decision and action, with thanksgiving for those who, like Dr. King, have helped show the way and who can inspire you with the courage to change. And as we do so, we indeed take heart and comfort in exactly what David said. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. Indeed.